Aquariums. They should be a delight, and they can be. They should be easy to maintain, and they can be. And one of the critical things in a marine aquarium particularly is the skimming. In the real world, nature takes over very easily. In a marine aquarium, we need to provide some technology that achieves the same result. Today we're looking at the Deltec skimmer range that's the most popular for us and the world at the moment. The new Deltec 600, 1000 and 1500i series. There's a reason why Deltec have been regarded for decades as the benchmark of the industry. Remember the days when all skimmers were black? And then one day Deltec decided, let's make our new range white. How many skimmers in the market are white now? Anyway, getting back to the technology rather than the aesthetics. So the new series of skimmer are quite different from the last series of Deltec skimmers, and certainly quite different from anything else that's out there. Deltec, as a matter of principle, design a product which is functional. Obviously aesthetics come into it. We all want something that looks good, particularly if we're actually paying for it. But Deltec's prime focus is function and efficiency. There are many stories out there of people who have questioned why they need to have a Deltec, and then either a Deltec representative or a retailer has been given a Deltec skimmer, set it up in an aquarium that's being skimmed perfectly, they thought, and the Deltec skimmer is turned on. Within a very short period of time, the other skimmer stops working, and the Deltec skimmer proceeds to take out of that aquarium system contaminants that never were noticed before. And then after a few days you turn the Deltec skimmer off and wait and see how many days it takes for the pollution level in that aquarium to build to the point where the other skimmer actually starts to pull out again. That's one of the big differences with Deltec. I'll really strongly emphasize now, with Deltec you do not oversize. There is no need to oversize with Deltec. If Deltec say a skimmer is sufficient for a 600 litre aquarium or a 1000 litre aquarium, believe them, they are correct. We actually actively advocate against people upsizing their skimmers. We need to realize that when we're pulling material out of an aquarium, we're not only pulling the contaminants, the organic matter out of an aquarium, we're also pulling trace elements out. It's a fact of life that when you skim, you take a lot of material out of an aquarium. So why would you use a skimmer that's larger than it needs to be and strips more trace elements than is necessary, only to have to put those trace elements back in the aquarium? Do not upsize when you're using a Deltec skimmer. So what's different about these skimmers? There are a lot of things different about them. When we do a water change, how often do we notice that the skimmate cup is starting to build up very quickly, and if we're not careful, particularly if we do a water change at the end of the day and then walk away, we come back in the morning and find the cup is overflowing. There's a reason for that. It's because the surface tension with new, or you might regard it as chemical soup, salt water, before it's actually matured and turned into proper salt water in the aquarium, is very high. So with a high surface tension, the bubbles tend not to burst, and the bubbles therefore rise into the skimmate cup and overflow the cup without bursting. That's how we get overflow or boil over in a skimmer. Obviously we can adjust for that, and we can be aware of that and minimize the chance of it happening, but it can still occur. Other things can happen. Something occurs in the aquarium, something changes while we're not there. The skimmer goes into overdrive and we have an overflow. Not so with the new series of Deltec skimmers. They've thought of this. They have overflow or boil over protection. So how does this work? Each of these new skimmers, the 600i, the 1000i and the 1500i, and yes, those refer to the aquarium sizes for normal stocking, have an overflow protection system. But first let's look at how they're adjusted. The Deltec skimmer has the adjustable standpipe here, which basically adjusts the level of water inside the chamber. The pressure, the back pressure, so the foam level is adjusted, and the foam level should be adjusted so that the bubbles are breaking around about this point. While I'm on this point, notice the shape of the chamber. The sides are parallel. It's not conical. Think about it. Bubbles rise. When bubbles rise, they want to rise vertically. Why would we want to make them go along a gradient and therefore slow down that vertical rise? If we put them into a cone, then the bubbles tend to be compressed certainly into the skimmer cup, and that's what Deltec do in this area here, a very short cone. But they also tend to stick on the sides of this long taper or cone. A vertical chamber minimises the chance of that happening. We're not, as I said earlier, totally focused on aesthetics when it comes to Deltec. The prime focus is on function. After that, aesthetics kick in. Parallel side chamber, that's the key. So we've adjusted the skimmer. Something changes in the aquarium, maybe it's a new water change, whatever. We're not here, and we start to get boil over. Traditionally so, not with a Deltec. There's this clever little device which prevents this. Think about how a skimmer works. It creates a large volume of bubbles in the main chamber, and this is achieved by, in this case, a pinwheel, which basically produces cavitation within the water, and that cavitation is a result of the water being pulled apart, and when water's pulled apart, something needs to go in there, so we give it some air to go in there. So there's an air inlet, and the air inlet is controlled through a silencer so that we don't get that hissing sound, so that it runs very quietly. Deltec skimmers are remarkably quiet because of the pump design and because of the air inlet design. So air goes through the silencer, through the silicon tube, into the venturi, which then feeds straight into the pump, and we get a mass of bubbles coming into the chamber and moving their way up into the skimmate cup. Well, that's great. But when we get boil over, the water level rises, and if nothing else intervenes, then we get the pollution, the contaminants that we've taken out of the aquarium overflowing back into the aquarium, and we're basically back to square one. So Deltec came up with this clever idea: why don't we stop the air inlet when the water level rises to the point of potential boil over? So this is the protection device. As the water comes up in the main chamber, it also comes up in this overflow protection tube to the point where it's overflowing from the tube. Now you can leave it at that and it will just overflow into the sump, but if it's a major issue, then it will continue. This is the air inlet. We have water rising. The air inlet suddenly is not taking air in, it's taking water in, and suddenly the skimming action collapses. It's turned off. Without the bubbles, the water level drops and the boil over is prevented. And certainly it will come up again, it will suck water rather than air, and it will juice. So it's regulating. So during boil over mode, the water level in the skimmer is up down until you intervene and adjust whatever needs to be adjusted, whether it's the skimmer function to allow for the new conditions in the aquarium, or an issue in the aquarium that needs to be addressed. What if you don't want that? Easy. If for some reason that doesn't suit you, remove the boil over tube, and down in the base we just press in a blanking plug. What if the boil over tube is in the wrong place? You like it, but you want it somewhere else. You want the adjustment tube on this side. They're interchangeable. Press the adjustment tube in there, the boil over tube on this side, move the little U-tube which supplies the air, and now we have the protection device on this side and the adjustment device on that side. So we may be wondering now, how can this be? What's going on down here that these two tubes can just very quickly be changed over? Aha. Deltec have a hollow base. It's a two-part base which is producing a sandwich and a chamber between those two. The base and the top, which holds the chamber, are separated by several millimeters. So the water flow is actually between those two parts of the base. That's how these two devices work so easily. That's how these two devices can be interchanged, and that's how you can choose to remove one of those devices if that's your will. So it's a very flexible, a very adaptable skimmer. The function of the Deltec skimmer is enhanced with a very high efficiency, very low power consumption DC motor. And part of the DC motor is the controller. When we say DC, we mean the actual power supply to the motor is low voltage DC into the controller, but the actual motor is frequency driven. So by controlling the frequency, we control the motor speed. So we can step the motor up or down. We can also stop it periodically with this button here. So this is a button which is typically used for feeding. We want to do a feeding cycle, press the button, the skimmer shuts off for 10 minutes. You don't have to worry about, did I turn that skimmer back on after I fed the fish this afternoon? It does it for you. 10 minutes later, everything is back to normal. And if the skimmer tends to start up and say, okay, we've got a fair bit of skimmate in here, and starts to get into boil-over mode, the boil-over protection kicks in. Perfect. Simple, elegant, perfect solution from Deltec. What about maintenance? If the water is filtered correctly, there should be a very small amount of maintenance required. But one thing with salt water is there's a fairly high level of calcium in it. At least there should be. Calcium does tend to precipitate out. So occasionally we need to maintain the skimmer properly by dismantling it, cleaning the parts, if required, dipping them in a weak acid solution to dissolve the calcium deposits, and then replacing everything. That can be a bit of a nightmare, or it can be really easy. With Deltec's system, it is really easy. So how easy is really easy? It's this easy. We'll just move a couple of these skimmers to one side and look at the 1500. All we do, for simplicity's sake, is remove the skimmate cup. While we're doing that, we'll notice the beautiful machining. All computer controlled machining. It's a bayonet fitting with a sealing O-ring. Very simple to remove. We remove the air inlet. We remove the overflow protection tube. We remove the control tube. Simple so far. We undo one screw, which locks that side of the chamber in. On this side we remove the venturi, the air inlet that's feeding the pump, and all we do now is lift the chamber off. So now we have the insides. We slide the pump off, we open the pump up, and there's the pinwheel. It's located with two plastic pegs. We pull it out, we do what we need to do, and we reassemble it. This is an opportunity to have a close look at this special base that Deltec have produced. There is the main fabric sheet, which is the bottom, and we have this other one on the top, and there's the hollow section for the two tubes, the control tube and the overflow tube, depending which way you feel you need to orient it. And here is the water inlet through here, etc., into the main chamber. It's a very elegant piece of equipment. And if you need to do more, then you can dismantle with these two screws. It's that simple. So when you're looking at a new skimmer for a marine aquarium, or looking for a new marine aquarium and deciding which skimmer to put on it, look at Deltec. It won't just be you that's looking at Deltec. Believe me, there's a lot of others that follow Deltec very closely. Thank you.